Have you ever imagined being cornered by someone from your past, and the only way out was to grab a stranger and say he's your husband? Well, that's exactly what Helena did, and the worst part? She had no idea who she had just embraced. This story will leave you speechless from beginning to end, but before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this video from? I want to know which city, which state, which country brought you here. And if you're not subscribed to this channel yet, take a moment now, click the subscribe button, turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories, and leave a like. It helps me so much. Now then, let's get to what matters. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Hyatt Manhattan cascaded golden light over the main ballroom. It was the most anticipated night on the New York Scala, an event that brought together the most influential in impeccable tuxedos, while discreet waiters served French champagne defense attorney, her own firm in the heart of Midtown Manhattan, and the respect of judges and prosecutors throughout the state. Her dark brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, framing a face with delicate features that concealed an iron determination. But behind that were scars that had taken 3 years to begin healing. She greeted some colleagues with polite accepted a champagne flute evil habit. "Helena," the voice of watching, Helena admitted, allowing herself a genuine smile. "But you were right. Few people who knew the truth about Helena's past. Wasn't on it." Helena nodded, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. Richard Allen was an assistant district attorney, one of the most influential in the state, and for 2 years he had been the man she believed she loved, until she discovered that love for him meant absolute control. At first it was small things, comments about her clothes, the baseless remarks, but the words left wounds that no court could judge. It took 2 years for Helena to recognize what was happening, and another 6 months to gather the courage to leave. Main ballroom. Helena pushed open the door of the ladies' room and took a deep breath. She had rebuilt her life brick by brick. She wouldn't let fear dominate her again. She touched up her dark red lipstick, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and squared her shoulders. She was ready to go back, but when she opened the door, her heart stopped. Richard Allen was leaning against the opposite wall, arms crossed over his chest. Ears of the Grand Hyatt Manhattan, Helena knew was nothing but a facade. His blue eyes, those eyes she had once found beautiful, now made Hala, an event that brought together the most influential names in the legal, business, and political worlds of the city. Women in haute couture gowns circulated among men in impeccable tuxedos. "It's been a while." She tried to walk past him, but Richard moved with a predator's agility, blocking her path. "In a hurry?" He tilted his head, studying her. 3 years, Helena. 3 whole years. No calls, no messages. You just disappeared. I broke up with you, Richard." Her voice came out firmer than she expected. "That's not disappearing. That's moving on. Breaking up?" He laughed softly, a sound that made her shudder. "Stand. You were confused, scared. I forgive you." Helena felt bile rise in her throat. This was how he operated, distorting reality, rewriting history to cast himself as the victim or the savior. "I don't need your forgiveness," she said through clenched teeth. "I need you to get out of my way. Not before we talk." Richard stepped forward, closing the distance between them. His cologne, that damned sandalwood cologne that still invaded her nightmares, enveloped her like a toxic cloud. "I've missed you, Helena," into her slender silhouette, like a second, manipulated me, destroyed me piece by piece. Richard's eyes darkened, the mask of civility slipping for an instant. "I loved you," he hissed. "Everything out of love. If you can't see that, the problem is yours. The problem is yours, Richard." And it always was. She fingers digging into her skin like claws. All defense at heart. The male voice cut through the air like a blade. Helena turned her head, heart racing, and saw a man walking toward them. Brown hair, slightly wavy. Without thinking, Helena broke free from Richard and grabbed the stranger's arm. Remarkably, some of the panic began to dissipate. Richard, only then that she truly looked at the face of scars, corner of the mouth smile she had known since childhood. Lucas Martin, her best friend since age, accepted a champagne flute study for the SATs. The young man who had left for Boston 10 years ago to study medicine and never came back. Lucas. He looked at her for an instant that seemed to contain a decade of absence, and then turned to Richard with a cordial smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nice to meet you," Lucas said, extending his hand that Richard didn't shake. "Lucas Martin. And now, if you'll excuse us, my wife promised me a dance." Before Richard could react, mentored her. She could say, did Helena finally breathe? And the questions exploded in her mind like fireworks. Most importantly, what the hell had she just done? The Grand Hyatt Terrace offered a panoramic view of the city, its lights twinkling like fireflies trapped in concrete. A gentle breeze stirred Helena's hair as she leaned against the glass railing, trying to process the last 5 minutes of her life. Lucas remained a few steps away, giving her space. She could feel him watching her, waiting, always patient, always present. Or at least that's how it had been before he disappeared. "Lucas," she finally said, turning to face him. How did you—" "I've been back for 6 months." Rival habit. "Helena!" The voice of Amanda, her partner and best friend, cut through the murmur. "You came. I thought you were going to back out again." "I almost did," Helena admitted, allowing herself a genuine smile. "But you were right. I can't spend the rest of my life hiding. Our old firm said you'd opened your own practice." He shrugged. "You're a doctor?" "Neurosurgeon." A brief smile crossed his lips. Mount Sinai fumed. She remembered the nights he says when he died. "I buried myself in work and left everything else behind, including you. And I'm sorry for that, Lena. More than I can express." Helena wanted to be angry. She wanted to scream that he had abandoned her when she needed him most, that she had faced Richard alone, that there were nights when she picked up her phone to call him before remembering she no longer had that right. But looking at Lucas now, at the regretful eyes, at the shoulders heavy with guilt, she couldn't. "How long do you need me to guard?" "What else?" Panic. "I wasn't on my own." "No." The word was firm, definitive. "Lucas." "Lena, I've known you since you were 6 years old." He took a step toward her, his eyes locked on hers. "You're the proudest person I know. You never ask for help, husband. It's because you were desperate." He gently held her chin, forcing her to look at him. "So let me help you." "Please." Helena's eyes filled with tears she fought to contain. "What if he finds out the truth?" she whispered. "Richard is dangerous, Lucas." He lied. Helena laughed, despite everything. A wet laugh, mixed with tears that finally escaped. "You're crazy." "I know," he said, offering her his arm. "But I'm the right kind of crazy." "Oh, that." On the other side of the terrace, hidden in the dark, plans were beginning. She was steaming coffee in hand, and her mind still processing the weekend's events. Lou wanted to scream, maintaining the appearance of a loving couple under the curious gaze Anna felt in her direction. Lucas dropped her off at home with the promise that they would talk. Had that early walls in a light grey tone, dark wood furniture, abstract paintings. She had chosen more for their relaxing colour palette than for any artistic meaning. Her sanctuary. But when she entered her personal office, something was wrong. A flower arrangement dominated her desk. Red roses, dozens of them, arranged in a crystal vase. That she picked up the card resting among the petals. The handwriting was familiar, slanted, precise letters she had seen on hundreds of notes during their relationship. "Marriage is proven with a certificate. I will find out the truth." Just see the card slipped from her fingers. Helena backed up until she hit the bookshelf, her heart pounding in her chest. How had he gotten in? How did he know where her office was? How much was he watching her? The guard. "What?" "Back there," Lucas explained. "You said I was your husband." Back in that time, when her every movement was monitored, every decision questioned, every breath measured. She grabbed her phone and dialed before she could think twice. "Lena?" Lucas's voice was sleepy. He must have been between surgeries or just coming out of one. "Is everything okay?" "He knows," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. "Richard knows it's a lie. He left a note. At my office. Inside my office, Lucas." There was a pause. When Lucas spoke again, all the sleepiness had vanished. "Where are you now?" Panic. "I wasn't thinking straight." She shook her head. "You don't have to do anything, Lucas." His voice was calm, clinical, as if he were giving instructions before surgery. "I'm on my way." "Lucas, you don't have to—" "I'm on my way," he repeated, and hung up. 40 minutes later, he walked through the office door wearing dark jeans and a light blue shirt, with the sleeves rolled up. There were dark circles under his eyes, traces of a night shift, but his gaze was alert, focused. Helena had already on my own. "No," the word was firm, definitive. "Lucas." "Lena, I've known you since you were 6 years old." He took a step toward her, his eyes locked on hers. "You're the proudest person I know. You never ask for help, never admit weakness. So if you grabbed a stranger, well, almost stranger, and said he was your husband, had arrived a few minutes earlier and was now stationed at reception, keeping the few morning clients away from Helena's office. "Let me see," Lucas said, carefully picking up the note. His eyes scanned the words, his jaw hardening with each passing second. "He's testing you. He wants you to panic and confess." "And that's exactly what I'm doing," Helena murmured, sinking into her chair. "Panicking? No." Lucas knelt before her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You're contain. What if he finds out the truth?" she whispered. "Richard, it's survival." She wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to. "What do I do now?" he said without turning around. "The first is that you tell the truth. Chance." Lucas smiled, that corner of the mouth smile that always. Helena laughed, despite everything. A wet laugh, mixed with tears that finally escaped. "You're crazy." "I know," he said, offering her his arm. "But I'm the right kind of crazy." And when he led her back to the ballroom, Helena allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Know that, on the other side of the terrace, hidden in the shadows, Richard Allen was watching every gesture. "Second?" He turned, his moss-green eyes meeting hers. "The second is to make the lie true." Helena frowned. "What do you mean?" "We faked the marriage long enough for Richard to give up. 3 months, maybe. Enough time for you to gather evidence of stalking and get a permanent restraining order." He crossed his arms. "But to be convincing, we need to live together." "Live together?" Helena stood up abruptly. "Lucas, this is insane." "Richard is insane," he countered. "And smart. If he starts investigating, and he will." Dark plans were beginning to take shape. Monday dawned grey in New York, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain. Helena arrived at the office. Helena shook her head, pacing back and forth. "I can't ask this of you. You have a career, a life. You can't just drop everything to pretend to be my husband. You're not asking." Lucas intercepted her path, stopping in front of her, steaming coffee in hand, and her mind still processing the weekend's events. Lucas. The name echoed in her thoughts like a bell. They were maintaining the appearance of a loving couple Helena couldn't decipher, but it disappeared as quickly as it appeared. "Because you're my friend," he said simply, "and because I owe you 10 years of absence." Helena wanted you. She wanted to list all the reasons why, and knew she didn't have many options. "Rules," she finally said. "If we're going to do this, we need rules." Lucas nodded. "What are they?" "Separate bedrooms. No feelings involved. This is purely strategic, purely temporary." When we get the restrainer felt in her direction, she squeezed Lucas's hand tighter. At the end of the night, they exchanged numbers, new numbers. Since words hurt her as they came out, Helena didn't show it. And if Lucas felt anything hearing them, he hid it well. "Deal," he said, and shook his hand, ignoring the warmth that radiated from his touch. "Partners." And as they sealed that insane agreement, neither of them noticed the shadow moving across the street, the private investigator Richard had hired, photographing every second of their meeting. Lucas's apartment in the Upper East Side was a neurosurgeon. Spacious. She didn't remember leaving it that way. "I'm fine," she said automatically, hating how her voice trembled. The door opened a bit more, revealing Lucas in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair disheveled from sleep. "You screamed," he said softly. "I heard it from my room." Helena wanted to deny it. She wanted to send him away, pretend everything was under control, but then she saw the genuine concern in his eyes, and something inside her broke. "The nightmares," she whispered. "I have nightmares. Since Richard." Didn't remember. Lee offered her one of the mugs, and waited. Helena didn't know how long they stayed there. Her talking, him listening. Her feel small, about her hair disheveled. "He never hit me," she repeated, as if that somehow diminished the trauma. "People don't understand. They think invisible scars are still scars." Helena looked at him in the air. She saw to face. He looked away. "But I shouldn't have cut contact. That was unforgivable." "It was," she agreed. "But I'm will." And then, for the first time since the gala, he saw Helena for the first. Richard. Lucas didn't ask anything more. He simply went to the kitchen and returned 10 minutes later with quick toast before the rush of the day. The isolated evenings became movies on the couch, debates about legal cases and medical procedures, laughter about childhood memories they both thought they had forgotten, and somewhere between pretense and reality, someone was watching the lights of their apartment turn on and off, noting every detail to deliver to Richard Allen. The living room of Richard Allen's apartment was cold. Offered her one of the mugs, her feel small on the desk. Richard was seated at that desk, studying a folder full of photographs. Each image showed Helena, leaving work, entering the Upper East Side, he private investigator, with grey hair and a permanently bored expression. He had worked for Richard before, on cases neither of them discussed openly. Invisible scars are still scars. Helena looked at him, at those moss-green eyes that had never judged her. "Why did you leave, Lucas?" "Really?" The question hung in the air. She saw something cross his face. Pain, guilt, and something more she couldn't identify. "I needed to go," he finally said. "There were things I wasn't ready to face." He looked away. "But I shouldn't have cut contact. That was unforgivable." "It was," she agreed. "But I'm working on forgiveness." He looked at her, surprised. And then, for the first time since the gala, he smiled genuinely. "Every county clerk's office in New York, the surrounding states, even further out. Nothing. If they're married, it wasn't in the United States." Richard drummed his fingers on the desk, his eyes fixed on a photo of Helena laughing at something Lucas had said. She looked happy, a happiness she had never shown when they were together. The rage burned in his chest, familiar and comforting. "What about abroad?" he asked. "More complicated." Carlos shrugged. "Vegas would be the obvious place for an impulsive wedding, but getting certificates from Nevada takes time. Weeks, maybe months." "I don't have months." "Then maybe you should consider an..." Elena, for the first time in years, slept without nightmares. The routine changed after that. The silent mornings transformed into shared breakfasts, even if they were just quick toast before the rush of the day. The isolated evenings became movies on the couch, debates about legal desk, crossing his legs. "She's lying, we both know it, but proving it is another story. In the meantime, you can make their memories they both thought they had forgotten." And somewhere between pretense and reality, something began to change. Helena just didn't know yet that outside the building, someone was watching the lights of their apartment turn on and off, noting every detail to deliver to Richard Allen. The living room of Richard Allen's apartment was cold, despite the heater being on. The white walls were devoid of any personal decoration, the furniture was functional and impersonal, and the only light source came from a minimalist designer lamp on the desk. Richard leaned forward, interested. "Go on." "Lucas Martin is a neurosurgeon at Mount Sinai. Impeccable reputation from what I've gathered, but every doctor makes mistakes, and every mistake can be turned into a scandal if you know where to look." "Possibilities." "Find out everything about him," Richard said. "Every patient, every surgery, every questionable decision." If Helena was walking alongside Lucas Martin at different times of day, "There's no marriage," private investigator, with grey hair and a left. Richard turned his attention back to the photos. His fingers traced Helena's face in one of the images, the touch almost tender. "You're mine," he murmured to the photo. "You always were. You always will be." On the other side of the city, completely unaware of it was Mrs. Rosa Martin's birthday, and the entire Martin family had gathered at the Connecticut house where Lucas grew up. Helena had known that house since childhood. She had spent countless afternoons there, playing in the backyard, stealing cookies, every county clerk's office in New York, the surrounding states, even further out. Nothing. If they're married, it wasn't in the United States. Eyes fixed on Rosa, practically pin. Helena laughed, returning the embrace. "You haven't changed at all." Large chest, familiar and comforting. "What about abroad?" "Changed. Still beautiful as ever." She turned to Lucas with an accusatory expression. "Why didn't you ever?" Helena and Lucas exchanged a glance. The lie had spread faster than they expected. Someone from the gala, probably an acquaintance of Rosa's, had mentioned seeing the two of them together, introducing themselves as husband and wife. "It was fast," Lucas said, wanted to wait for the right moment to tell everyone. "And when would that have been?" Rosa crossed her arms. "When I was in my grave." "Mom, don't mom me." But there was a smile behind the scolding. "You two were always attached at the hip. I knew one day this would happen. I just didn't think it would take so long." Helena forced a smile, ignoring the pesk, crossing his legs. "She's lost." It was a whirlwind of familiar and semi-familiar takes, and every questions repeated possibility, turning to face the other man. "Dr. Martin," he said, the title dripping with scorn. "The fake husband." Lucas entered the office with measured steps, stopping beside Helena. The warmth of his presence enveloped her like armor. "Real husband," Lucas corrected calmly. "And if you come near my wife again, I'll make sure you lose a lot more than a case." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you." Lucas took a step forward, and something in his posture made Richard instinctively retreat. "You may be an ADA." He turned with a lethal, Lucas replied, opening the door and indicating the exit with a nod. Richard passed by him without another word, but the look he cast at Helena promised storms. When the door closed, Helena's legs gave out. She leaned against the desk, air leaving her lungs in short bursts. "Hey, hey!" Lucas was at her side in a second, hands on her shoulders. "It's over, he's gone." "Las Vegas," she said, looking at him. "I said we got married in Las Vegas. He's going to investigate. He'll find out it's a lie." Lucas studied her for a lot. He held her chin. "Saying was you grabbing a stranger at the gala and saying he was your husband." A brief smile crossed his lips. "Compared to that, getting married in Vegas is pretty reasonable." Helena wanted to argue. She wanted to list all the reasons why this was the worst idea in the world. But then she remembered the threat that had been chasing her for 3 years. Only on paper, Helena was certain that everything had already changed. The flight to Las Vegas took 5 hours. Helena spent most of it pretending to read a book. She was about to get married. Technically, she was already married. At least, that's what everyone thought. But there was a difference between pretending and formalizing. A difference that became more real with every mile separating them from New York. Lucas, beside her, worked on his lap, doing anything to avoid the elephant in the cabin that would leave minimal traces. Amanda was covering Helena's office. A colleague was covering Lucas's patients. Everything calculated, everything under control, except for the feelings Helena was struggling to ignore. Las Vegas welcomed them with its blinding glow and organized chaos. The taxi dropped them off in front of a modest hotel away from the Strip. No extravagant suites or complimentary champagne. This was work, Helena reminded herself, not a honeymoon. "The clerk's office opens at 10, Lucas said, more than a case. "Are you threatening me?" I raised an eyebrow. "A tiny bathroom. Helena, investigating us, pressuring us, threatening us." Infinitely. "Okay," he finally said. "Then let's do this." Saturday dawned absurdly sunny, as if the universe hadn't received the memo that this, and not a romantic celebration. The Clark County Clerk's office was surprisingly bureaucratic for a city famous for impulsive weddings, fees. Helena filled out the papers with a strange sense of displacement, as if watching another person take control of her body. The chapel Lucas chose was on, away from the neons and noise. It was a small, discreet building with white flowers at the entrance and an air of authenticity that contrasted with the circus around it. "You're next," said a middle-aged woman with red hair and a professional smile. Any clearly accustomed to couples who were less than enthusiastic. The ceremony itself lasted less than 10 minutes. Standard vows, automatic responses, the signing of documents that would transform a lie into legal truth. And then came the moment Helena had avoided thinking about. "You may kiss the bride." She looked at Lucas. He looked at her. For a second that seemed to stretch into eternity, neither of them moved. Then Lucas leaned in and touched his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, brief, technically appropriate for the occasion, but when his lips met hers, Helena felt something snap inside her, like a door that had been locked for years finally giving way. When they separated, she saw in his eyes the same shock she felt with a lethal calm she didn't recognize. "This isn't over," Richard finally said, taking a step toward the door. "You'll both regret this." "Good afternoon," Lucas replied, opening the door and indicating the exit with a nod. Richard passed by him without another word, but the look he cast at Helena promised storms. When the door closed, Helena's legs gave out. She leaned against the desk on her shoulders. "It's over, he's gone." "Las Vegas," she said, looking at him. "I said we got married in Las Vegas. He's going to investigate. He'll find out it's a lie." Lucas studied her for a long moment. "Then let's make it true." Helena blinked. "What? We get married in Las Vegas, for real? A paper marriage, just to have the certificate." Heard between them. Between them was charged with something neither of them could name. Helena went to the window, looking at the parking lot without really seeing it. "That," she began, "was necessary," Lucas completed, his voice strangely hoarse. "It's part of the ceremony. I know." She turned to face him. But he was closer than she expected. When had he moved? His moss-green eyes gleamed in the room's dim light, and Helena realized, "Saying was you grabbing a stranger at the gala and saying he was your husband." A brief smile. "We agreed. I know what we agreed." Not for Helena what had been chasing her for. "You don't have to know right now." The air seemed colder without his warmth. Helena felt an irrational loss, as if something precious had slipped. "Sleep," he said, walking to his bed with movements that were too controlled. "The flight tomorrow leaves early." Helena stood there for a long moment, watching him lie down with his back to her. 1,000 words. She simply lay down in her own bed and spent hours staring at the ceiling, remembering the warmth of his lips on hers, and terrified to discover she wanted to feel it again. The marriage was on paper. The kiss was supposed to be fake, but what Helena felt in her chest was frighteningly real. Back in New York, life should have returned to normal, but normal had become a nebulous, indefinable concept. The Las Vegas certificate arrived by mail 2 weeks later, an official document proving on letterhead that Helena Rhodes and Lucas Martin were legally married. Lucas stored it in a folder in the apartment's office, alongside medical documents and lease contracts. Pragmatic, functional. But nothing else between them was pragmatic or functional. The touches to keep up appearances lasted longer than necessary. When they went out Helena was certain that everything had already changed. The flight to Lucas's colleagues, events at Helena's office, holding hands felt increasingly natural. The exchanged glances carried entire conversations that neither of them verbalized, and there were the private moments, the ones no one saw. One night, returning from dinner with Lucas's friends, it started to rain. They ran from the car to the building, arriving at the apartment soaked and laughing like teenagers. Lucas went to get towels while Helena took off her wet shoes and went to Las Vegas. She was about to get married. Technically, she was already married. At least, that's what everyone thought. But there was a difference between pretend hair drip-plaint. Lucas's voice was too controlled, as if he were making a conscious effort not to break. They're alleging medical negligence in a surgery 6 months ago. I'm under investigation by the medical board. Helena's blood ran cold. Richard? We can't prove it. But yes, obviously it's him. Helena stood up, grabbing her bag with automatic movements. I'm coming over. Lena, you don't have to. I'm coming. She found Lucas at the apartment, sitting in the living room with an untouched glass of whiskey in his hand. He was staring out the window with an expression that made her want to cry, the expression of a man who had spent his life building something, only to watch it be destroyed. The surgery was a success, he said, when she sat beside him. The patient recovered completely. He's alive because of that operation. He laughed without humor. But someone sent a complaint detailing supposed procedural errors that never happened. Who signed the complaint? Anonymous. Like I said, he finally looked at her, and there was a pain in his eyes that took her breath away. Richard has contacts everywhere. He probably paid someone to forge the document. Helena felt guilt crush her like a wave. This is my fault, she said, her voice breaking. I brought this into your life. If it weren't for the fake marriage, the lie. No. Lucas set the glass on the table and turned to face her. You didn't do anything wrong. Richard is responsible. Richard and no one else. But if I had faced him another way, he would have found another way to attack. Lucas held her hands. That's the kind of person he is. There's no way to avoid someone like that. You can only face them. Helena shook her head, tears finally streaming down. I didn't want you to pay the price for protecting me. Hey, Lucas touched her face, wiping the tears with his thumbs. I chose to be here. I chose to fake the marriage. I chose to make it real. You didn't drag me into this. I wanted to be by your side. Why? She sobbed. Why do you keep choosing this? You could have moved on. You could have let me deal with Richard alone. Lucas studied her for a long moment, and then he said the words that changed everything. Because I never stopped loving you, Lena. Not for a single day. Not in 10 years on the other side of the country. Helena stopped breathing. What? That teenage crush I mentioned? He smiled sadly. It never went away. I tried to move on. I dated other people. I tried to build a life without you. But there was always this empty space I couldn't fill. Lucas, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to feel the same way. You just need to know that whatever happens to my career, I don't regret it. I would be willing to lose everything again if it meant being by your side. It was too much. All the tension, all the fear, all the guilt Helena had been carrying, everything broke at once. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing like she hadn't in years, letting him hold her while she finally allowed herself to be vulnerable. Lucas held her all night. He didn't try to kiss her, didn't ask for anything in return. He simply stayed there, being her anchor while she faced the internal storms that had tormented her for so long. And when she woke up the next morning, still in his arms, Helena knew 2 things. First, that Richard Allen would not win. No matter how long it took, no matter what it cost, she would find a way to destroy that man. Second, that she was hopelessly, completely, irrevocably in love with Lucas Martin, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to admit it. Helena had always been excellent at her job. Years of practice had transformed her into a legal investigation machine, capable of finding loopholes where others saw only walls, of building cases where others saw only ruins. Now she would channel all that skill against Richard Allen. She started discreetly, using her contacts in the legal world to ask seemingly innocent questions. A colleague here, an acquaintance there. She discovered that Richard had been divorced twice before meeting her, information he had never shared during their 2 years together. Find the ex-wives, Helena told Amanda during a late-night work session, and any other woman he dated. Amanda looked at her with concern. Helena, this could be dangerous. If Richard finds out you're investigating him, he's already attacking me, Helena replied. He's trying to destroy my husband's career. The word husband came out with a naturalness that surprised her. I have nothing left to lose by being cautious. It took 3 weeks, but the results started to appear. Richard's first ex-wife, Beatrice, lived in Chicago and refused to talk. The second, Camilla, had moved to London and didn't return calls. But then Helena found Marina. Marina Santos was 32 years old, worked as an architect, and had dated Richard for 8 months. 2 years before Helena met him, and unlike the others, she was willing to talk. He destroyed me, Marina said on a video call, her eyes still carrying ghosts. He controlled every aspect of my life, clothes, friendships, work. By the end, I didn't recognize who I was anymore. Why did you never report him? Who would believe me? Marina laughed bitterly. He's an ADA. He knows judges, cops, politicians. I was just a middle-class architect with my word against his. Helena felt her heart clench. It was her own story reflected in another face. What if you weren't alone? She asked. What if other women testified with you? Marina studied her through the screen. How many? I'm finding out, but at least 2, besides me. A long silence. And then, tell me more. Meanwhile, the investigation against Lucas was also advancing, but not in the direction Richard expected. Lucas's colleagues at Mount Sinai mobilized in his defense. The chief of surgery sent a detailed report to the medical board, attesting to the excellence of the questioned procedure. Other doctors testified on Lucas's behalf, describing his competence and dedication. Even the patient from the supposedly problematic surgery appeared, furious that his case was being used as a weapon. In less than a month, the investigation was dismissed for lack of evidence. Lucas returned to the hospital not as a man under suspicion, but as a hero. His colleagues received him with applause on his first day back. The hospital director issued a public statement acknowledging that the accusations were unfounded and questioning the anonymous source of the complaint. Helena was at the office when she received Lucas's call confirming the dismissal. She screamed with joy so loudly that Amanda came running to see if everything was okay. That night, they celebrated at the apartment. Lucas cooked, for the first time in months, and they opened a bottle of wine that had been saved for special occasions. They talked, laughed, let the weight of the past weeks slide off their shoulders. And then, somewhere between dessert and the second glass of wine, Lucas kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss in Las Vegas, technical, necessary, controlled. This one was slow, deep, laden with years of waiting and weeks of restraint. Helena felt the world disappear around them, leaving only the warmth of his lips, the taste of wine, the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. When they separated, both were breathless. Lena, Lucas began. She silenced him with another kiss. She wouldn't think about consequences. She wouldn't weigh pros and cons. She wouldn't let fear control her again. For the first time in years, Helena chose to feel. And that night, neither of them slept alone. The days that followed were the happiest Helena could remember. She and Lucas decided to try a real relationship. No more pretending, no more rules. The paper marriage transformed into something real, built brick by brick between shared breakfasts, dinners prepared together, and nights that ended intertwined on the same side of the bed. But Helena carried scars that didn't heal overnight. Sometimes, without warning, she withdrew. A raised tone of voice made her body stiffen. A door slamming made her jump. And there were moments that deeply embarrassed her, when she tested Lucas. She provoked arguments, waited for him to react with anger, almost wished he would prove he was just like Richard. Lucas never took the bait. One night, after a particularly difficult week at work, Helena exploded. She yelled about wet towels in the bathroom, about dishes in the sink, about small, insignificant things that masked bigger fears. "You're going to get tired of me," she shouted, tears streaming before she could stop them. "Everyone gets tired. Richard got tired, and you will too." Lucas was silent for a moment, absorbing the words like waves crashing against a rock, and then he said, With a calm that completely disarmed her, "I waited 10 years for you, Lena. I can wait another 10 if I need to. I'm not going anywhere." Helena stopped. The words stuck in her throat, breath caught in her chest. "Why?" she whispered. "Why don't you yell back? Why don't you get angry?" "Because I'm not Richard." Lucas approached slowly, like someone approaching a frightened animal. "And you're not the woman he tried to turn you into. You're the girl I met when we were 6, the one who fought with the older boys to defend the younger ones, the one who cried for a week when her dog died, the one who always put others above herself." He touched her face. "Richard didn't manage to destroy who you are. He only managed to make you forget." Helena closed her eyes, feeling the tears flow freely. "I don't know who I am anymore," she confessed. "Sometimes I look in the mirror and don't recognize the person I see." "Then let's find out together." Lucas pulled her into a hug. "For as long as you need. No pressure, no deadlines." That night, lying in the dark, Helena finally understood something that had eluded her for years. Love wasn't control. It wasn't possession. It wasn't fear disguised as care. Love was Lucas letting her free to go but choosing to stay. Love was infinite patience in the face of her imperfections. Love was not having to be perfect to be loved. And when she finally allowed herself to believe that, truly believe it, she felt as if a chain that had bound her for years had finally broken. She still had a long road ahead. Scars didn't disappear just because someone decided they should. But for the first time, Helena wasn't walking alone, and that made all the difference. The case against Richard Allen was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in March. Helena spent weeks building the case. Marina agreed to testify. 2 other women, a former fiancé and a former co-worker, also came forward, each with her own story of manipulation, control, and psychological destruction. Together, they painted a portrait of a man who had turned the destruction of women into a pattern of behavior. The case was for stalking, coercion, and psychological abuse. It wasn't a criminal case. Getting criminal charges against someone as well connected as Richard would be nearly impossible. But it was a civil case that could result in a permanent restraining order and, more importantly, damage to the reputation Richard prized so much. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Lawyers, journalists, curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to see the respected ADA in the defendant's seat. Richard entered with his team of expensive lawyers, his suit impeccable, the expression of someone who had nothing to fear. His eyes met Helena's across the courtroom, and she saw the same arrogance as always, the same certainty that he was untouchable. But Helena was no longer the frightened woman she had been. She was no longer the victim trembling in a hotel corridor. She was a criminal defense attorney, and she was about to destroy the man who had nearly destroyed her. The plaintiff calls Helena Rhodes Martin to the stand. The name Martin still felt strange, but Helena rose with her head held high. She walked to the witness stand, took the oath, and began to tell her story. For the first time publicly, she spoke about the initial enchantment, about the first signs she ignored, about how Richard gradually isolated her from friends and family, about the nights she cried in the bathroom without knowing why, about how it took years to understand that what she suffered was abuse, even without a single physical mark. "He convinced me I was crazy," Helena said, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to fall, "that my perceptions were wrong, that I should be grateful to have someone willing to love me despite all my flaws." She looked directly at Richard. "It took me 3 years to rebuild what he broke, and he still tried to destroy everything again." Richard's lawyer tried to discredit her. He called her a bitter ex, an unstable woman, a lawyer trying to promote herself. But Helena had prepared for every attack, every insinuation. And then came the other witnesses, Marina with her mirrored story, the former fiancé, who shook the entire courtroom with her account of financial manipulation, the co-worker, who described how Richard stalked her for months after she refused his advances. The pattern was undeniable. 4 women, different stories, but the same modus operandi, the same predator, with different faces. Lucas was in the gallery throughout the trial. Helena found his eyes in difficult moments, and his presence was like an anchor keeping her steady when the waves threatened to knock her down. On the 3rd day, the jury retired to deliberate. Helena waited in the witness room, unable to eat or drink. Lucas was by her side holding her hand without saying anything. Amanda, who had followed the entire process, paced back and forth like a caged animal. When the official called everyone back to the courtroom, Helena's heart beat so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The judge read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant Richard Allen guilty of stalking in the 1st degree, guilty of psychological coercion, Guilty of harassment. The world seemed to stop. The defendant is ordered to pay damages to the victims, mandatory psychological treatment, and a permanent restraining order regarding all plaintiffs in this case. Additionally, given the defendant's public office, we recommend the District Attorney's Office open administrative proceedings to evaluate his conduct. Applause erupted in the gallery. Helena felt her legs weaken, and Lucas caught her before she could fall. "It's over," he whispered in her ear. "You won." When they left the courthouse, Richard passed by them. His expression was no longer one of arrogance. There was something broken there, something defeated. He looked at Helena with a hatred that should have frightened her, but she felt no fear. For the first time in years, looking at the man who had nearly destroyed her, Helena felt only one thing: freedom. 3 months had passed since the trial. Helena's life had transformed in ways she never imagined possible. Richard had lost his position as ADA and moved to another state, fleeing the scandal that now tainted his name. Marina and the other women had become friends, an unlikely group of survivors, supporting each other in rebuilding their lives. And Lucas was the constant she didn't know she needed. They had found a rhythm. Mornings of shared coffee, nights of conversations that stretched until dawn, weekends discovering the city as if it were new. Helena had returned to therapy and was finally working through the traumas Richard had left. Some days were harder than others, but Lucas was always there, patient, constant, unwavering. On a night in June, he invited her for a walk. "Where are we going?" Helena asked as he drove through the streets of New York. Surprise. She rolled her eyes but smiled. The car stopped in front of a park Helena didn't immediately recognize, but when they got out and Lucas guided her down a stone path lit by old lampposts, the memory hit her like a wave. "This is," she began. "The park where we used to play as kids," Lucas completed. "My mom used to bring us here on weekends, remember?" Helena remembered. She remembered races on the grass, sword fights with tree branches, entire afternoons lost in childhood imagination. And she remembered a specific bench. Lucas led her to it, a wrought iron bench, a bit rusty now but still in the same place as always. "Here," he said, stopping in front of the bench. "This is where you cried, when Pepper died." Pepper, the dog Helena had had from age 5 to 8, the first being she had loved and lost. "You stayed by my side for hours," she said, her voice thick with memory. "You didn't say anything. You just stayed." "I was 8 years old," Lucas shrugged. "I didn't know what to say, but I knew I didn't want you to be alone." Helena looked at him, at the man that 8-year-old boy had become, and felt love flood her in a way that still surprised her, even after all these months. "Lucas." But then he knelt down. Helena's heart stopped. "Our wedding in Vegas was out of necessity," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "It was a strategy, a lie we needed to make true." He opened the box, revealing a white gold ring with a delicate diamond. "But I want a wedding by choice, by love, for you." "Lucas." Tears were already streaming down her face. "Helena Rhodes, will you marry me? For real this time?" She wanted to answer. She wanted to scream yes until the whole park could hear, but the words were stuck in her throat, blocked by the emotion overwhelming her. So she simply nodded, once, twice, 1,000 times. "Yes," she finally managed to say. "Yes, yes, yes." Lucas slid the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her. And then, like in a movie, applause erupted around them. Helena pulled away, confused, and saw they weren't alone. Mrs. Rosa, Amanda, Lucas's siblings, friends of both. Everyone was there, hidden behind trees and bushes, witnessing the moment. "You planned this," she accused Lucas, laughing and crying at the same time. "You thought I'd propose without an audience?" He smiled. "I've known you for 23 years, Lena. I know you love a good drama." She punched his shoulder playfully, then hugged him with all the strength she had. Around them, the people they loved most celebrated. Mrs. Rosa was crying rivers of joy. Amanda was compulsively taking photos, and Helena, in the middle of all that wonderful chaos, finally felt at home. The Vegas wedding had been necessity. This one would be love. The ceremony took place on a late September afternoon, at a vineyard in the Hudson Valley. It wasn't the grand wedding some people expected from a successful lawyer and a renowned neurosurgeon. It was intimate. 100 guests between family and close friends, decor in shades of white and green that blended with the surrounding landscape, and an outdoor ceremony under the orange sky of sunset. Helena walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, a decision she had made after much thought. Her father had passed away years before, but her mother was there, finally present, after years of emotional distance. Their relationship was still being rebuilt, but it was a start. Lucas waited at the altar, his eyes shining with contained emotion. When Helena stopped before him, he whispered, "You look beautiful." "You don't look so bad yourself," she replied, drawing laughter from the guests who heard. The ceremony was simple and emotional. Vows they had written themselves, promises made eye to eye, tears flowing freely from both the couple and those present. Mrs. Rosa, true to form, cried from beginning to end. At the reception, between dances and toasts, Lucas stood up to give a speech. "Many of you know the story of how Helena and I reconnected," he began, holding her hand. "Some know the details, of the fake marriage that became real, of the desperate lie that transformed into the most beautiful truth of my life." Helena squeezed his hand, feeling love radiate from that touch. "What few know," Lucas continued, "is that I loved this woman my whole life. Since we were 6 years old when she shared her lunch with me because I'd forgotten mine at home." Laughter rippled through the room. "I spent 10 years on the other side of the country trying to forget her. It didn't work. And when I found her at that gala, scared and desperate, I knew I would never let her go again." He turned to face her directly. "Lena, you are the strongest person I know. You went through things that would destroy most people, and yet here you are, fighting, winning, loving." His voice faltered. "I'm lucky you chose me. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that choice." Helena stood up, ignoring the tears ruining her makeup. "My turn," she said, and the room fell silent. "I spent years writing briefs to defend other people," she began. "I dedicated hours building arguments, studying cases, fighting for justice, but I never knew how to defend myself. I never thought I deserved to be saved." She looked at Lucas. "Until my childhood best friend appeared in a corridor and pretended to be my husband." Emotional laughter rippled through the room. "Lucas saved me that night," Helena continued. "But more importantly, he taught me that I deserved to be saved, that I deserved to be loved, that I deserved to be happy." She held his face between her hands. "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." The kiss that followed lasted too long to be appropriate at a wedding ceremony. No one complained. The party continued late into the night, with dancing, laughter, and memories being created at every moment. Helena danced with Mrs. Rosa, with Amanda, with every person who had played a role in her journey to this point, and when the moon was high in the sky, she and Lucas slipped away from the party for a moment, finding a stone bench overlooking the vineyards bathed in silver light. "Happy?" Lucas asked. Helena considered the question. A year ago, she wouldn't have known what happiness meant. 2 years ago, she thought she would never be capable of feeling it again. "Yes," she said, and the word had never been so true. For the first time in a long time, yes. They sat there for a long moment, in comfortable silence, watching the stars. And then Helena said something that changed everything once more. "Lucas, I'm pregnant." He turned his head so fast she would have laughed under other circumstances. "What?" "I found out last week." She held his hand, placing it over her still flat belly. "I wanted to wait until after the wedding to tell you." Lucas looked at her with an expression she had never seen, a mixture of shock, joy, love, and fear, all colliding in his moss-green eyes. "We're going to—" He swallowed hard. "We're going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby." He hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe, but she didn't mind. She could feel his tears wetting her neck, could feel his heart beating against hers. "I love you," he said, his voice muffled. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Helena replied. "I always did. It just took me a while to realize it." The cycle of pain had finally broken. Where there had been fear, now there was courage. Where there had been loneliness, now there was family. Where there had been darkness, now there was light. Helena looked at the man she loved, at the ring on her finger, at the future growing inside her, and knew, with a certainty that came from the deepest part of her soul, that the best was yet to come. Because sometimes the most desperate lie can transform into the most beautiful truth, and sometimes the right person is just waiting for you to recognize them, even if they've been by your side their entire life. Love is not about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who makes you believe you deserve to be loved exactly as you are.